In this lesson, we'll talk about the basics of materials and texturing in Mudbox. So, as we go through and sculpt and build our model up, we can have different types of materials on our model as we go. And for this, it may not be too important as to the specific properties of the material. So, in that case, we can choose from a material preset down here in our material presets tray. For instance, we can get something that's very reflective, depending on the type of object that we have. So we'll just click on that, and then I'll go ahead and add that as a preset. You can see that it doesn't really match up with the model that we're using, but in some cases it could work for us. You could get something like this reflective red material. May work well for us. You can see how shiny and glossy that is. Maybe that's not the direction we want to go, so we want to do something maybe a little bit darker. And go ahead and select this black material. And so all of these material presets give us a great way to just quickly add some different types of materials as we model. Some people like to have a certain specularity on their materials as they model so they can see all the ins and outs a little bit better of their model. So it really just depends on what you want to do, but you do have all of these material presets available to you. Now, as far as going ahead and adding specific materials to our model, what we can do is to go ahead and we'll just right click on the model that we have, and we can either assign an existing material or we can assign a new material, and there are a few materials to choose from. If we assign a simple blend material, I'll go ahead and open that up. It'll give us the option to put in a diffuse color, specular, and ambient, and then an amount of shininess. So this may work just fine for going in and modeling. But when we start to add paint layers, we need to actually use a Mudbox material. So rather than adding a simple blend, we can add a Mudbox material. So go ahead and assign new material, and that'll bring up this material 2. Okay, and so here we can choose the color in the diffuse. So if we want to have make it more of a yellow or green or maybe an orange color, we can do that. Okay, in the diffuse. So that's basically the color channel. We also have specularity. So if we go ahead and click on that, it brings up the new color chooser that we're looking at, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But you can see that we can pick a color here. So if we want it to be a little bit more specular, we can go ahead and bring that more into the gray. If we want it to be less specular, we can take that back down towards black. Okay, so let's go ahead and raise that specularity up a bit. Okay, we also have gloss. So for this, if we want to bring this gloss value up, that's going to make this tighten up the specular and make it look a little bit more glossy. So we'll go ahead and bring that up. And you can see how we can start to make that look. It looks maybe a little bit more wet, a little bit more shiny. As we take it back down towards black, you can see it gets a little bit less shiny. So that's how we'll modify that gloss. Okay. We also have an area for bump map, normal map, reflection mask. We've got a reflection map already added. The reflection strength is 0 right now. If we were to go ahead and raise that up, we can get a little bit of reflectivity in here using the image that we have in our reflection map. Okay, and if you've got an HDR image loaded, that will you can reflect that as well. So we'll go ahead and take that back down. So you can see that we have a lot of options in here for modifying aspects of these materials. Now, one of the great things is in Mudbox is the ability to go in and paint maps for these different parts of the material. Okay, and we'll talk about that as we go. Here in our object list, you'll now see the material. Here's our blend material. We can go ahead and delete that. We can rename this material. So we'll just right clicking on that will bring this up, and we can just call this Rex body material or something like that, something meaningful. Okay, and at any time we can go ahead and select that material, and then the properties will come up and we can change those properties. Okay. All right, so now that we have this material assigned, and we want to actually assign materials to each object, so we do have the teeth in there, so I'm actually going to assign another material to those teeth. And I'll go ahead and just make that actually kind of white. Okay. And I want to add that. I believe it's that material 1. And I'll rename that teeth mat. And I just want to make sure that that is assigned. All right. Okay. And I'm actually changing the specular here, so I want to actually change the diffuse. Okay, so I'm going to bring that up. Give it a little bit of yellow. Okay. So we've got the teeth and we've got the body assigned to separate materials. So now if we want to access the material for the body and actually do some painting on this, we need to go into our layers. And here we'll access, this is where we access our sculpt layers. We also have paint layers, and this is where we're going to be able to put maps, associate maps with some of the different channels that we have here. So for instance, if we want to create a map for the color, we'll just go ahead and say new layer, or again here we can go ahead and create a new layer. Also, if you choose one of your paint tools and you begin to paint on something that doesn't have a paint layer, it's going to ask you to create one. So we can go ahead and call this Rex body diffuse or color, something like that. We can choose a size for that, and I probably would want to make it 2K, but I'm going to go ahead and make it 1K just to so everything goes a little bit quicker. And we can save it as a TIFF, and here we'll choose the channel that we want to actually add that to. And if you want to paint a color map, you're going to want to put it into the diffuse. But you can see that we also have options for specular, gloss, the incandescence, which we didn't really look at, but it's kind of a glow that you can add to it. Also bump map, normal map, and reflection mask. All right, so I'm actually going to go ahead and make that 2K. So we can add this all up. We've got the name, we've got the size, the type file that we have there, and then also the channel. Go ahead and say OK, and that'll add a new paint layer associated with that particular material. So you want to make sure that you assign different materials to your different objects, because this paint layer will be associated with this particular material. So if we have assigned this material to another object, then we're going to have that paint layer to deal with as well. Okay, so then we can come in with our, just start by just looking at our paintbrush, just a default paintbrush, and now we can come in and start to paint on this particular layer. Okay, so you can see that that's going to be located in here, and we can always just turn that off, and now you're seeing just the color from the material. Now if we want to fill this all with white, we can utilize one of the new features here in 2011. We can unfold this to the UV. So if you look at this, this is the UV layout here that we've got. Let's go ahead and unfold this geometry to UV. So we'll go ahead and go to Mesh, Flatten to UV Space, and you can see that that's now flattened up. Now you can see it didn't really focus on our camera didn't really focus on that as it happened. So let's go ahead and unflatten. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and change some of the settings that we have here. So we'll go into our preferences. Okay, and we'll go to focus and autofocus on flatten. We'll go ahead and turn that on. All right, so now if we were to go in and flatten to UV space, it's going to autofocus here on the mesh that we've got. And if we look in our object list, there's actually two meshes here now. The dinosaur body's been turned off, and we now have this flattened mesh. Okay, so what I want to do is quickly just fill this with white. So now that I've got this flattened, it's really easy to do. I'll just go in and on that paint layer, just paint through this if I want to kind of fill this basic texture with white before we start painting, so that we're not getting any of that color from the material, but it's all coming from the texture map. We can go in and just, and this makes it a little bit easier than trying to move the model around and paint in some of the different areas that it's maybe a little bit harder to get to. This enables you to really quickly paint through this, and we'll use this again when we modify our textures using the image adjustment brushes, but this is also a good way to use this if you want to fill that, go ahead and fill that texture map with color. This is one of the ways that we can do that just very quickly, just by painting over this. All right, so once we've got that all filled with color, you can also start to create other paint layers. We'll go into that in a later lesson when we're talking about painting with multiple channels and working with some of the blend modes with some of the layers that we have here. But right now we're just kind of concerned with this single layer. So we'll go ahead now and go back to unflatten from UV space, and we should have our paint layer should reflect on our model, so it's all filled with white here. All right, and we can still go back and modify the different properties of our material as well. Okay, so just keep that in mind. You want to have a material for each object, and then you can associate paint layers with your different materials. And the diffuse shows the channel that we're using, and then this is our actual image file. Okay, we can also import layers. So if you have an existing texture that you want to use, you could import that to a paint layer. All right, if you want to trash it, of course you can go ahead and delete it here, delete it here. You can also turn the visibility off and on and lock it, just as we did with our sculpt layers. So a lot of different options here. So those are some of the basics of working with materials and textures. The next thing that we want to look at is actually the on-target presentation. So before we start painting textures and things like that, we really want to have the environment here in Mudbox reflect our final environment as closely as possible. So we'll look at a few ways that we can do that in the next lesson.